How has the verdict been received in Bangladesh generally?
I think this is a moment of relief for the Bangladeshis, especially the families who've lost their loved ones during the revolution last year, the thousands of young people who are still injured, who've lost limbs, who've lost eyes, who've lost their livelihoods. And so this in some way, while this is a symbolic victory for them.
And I understand you were on the front lines of it by reporting on it last year, so it was all you saw it all firsthand. Remind us what happened last year. What were the protests sparked by, and what did the court find Sheikh Hasina's role was in the deaths?
So a year and a half ago, the students started protesting to abolish quotas in government jobs. But unfortunately, the then Sheikh Hasina government cracked down on those students extremely brutally. And that sort of that was a mobilizing moment for the whole population, because the last thing I think that the population would have tolerated was a state killing its own children. And that culminated into a popular mass uprising, which of course led to Sheikh Hasina's government being overthrown, and Sheikh Hasina had to flee to India. And a year and a half later, I think we are at a moment where we are sort of coming to a full circle, where there were some 1,400 deaths during the revolution, and a year and a half later, those families are probably receiving some solace. I mean, you can't really ever fill up the grief of losing a loved one, but this is, I think, a sort of symbolic solace for them.
And Zyma, what was it like for you reporting on the front line and witnessing what was happening and talking to the families since who've lost their children?
I remember this one day, this was on August 5th, when we were at a government hospital where all of the dead protesters were being brought in. And we were on our feet for hours because there were bodies being brought in literally every minute. And at one point, it was my job as a reporter to try and count how many bodies were being brought in, try to find their families. And at one point, I just lost count because it was impossible. It was a wave of bodies being brought in. And August 5th, that particular day stands out as one of the bloodiest. Before that, while we were interviewing families, and this is during a time when Sheikh Hasina government was truly cracking down on protesters, cracking down on anyone found to be linked with the protest, and even the media. So trying to find the families who had secretly buried their loved ones, who probably never thought that a day like this will ever occur in their lives, a day where they would find that the person who had given the order to kill their family members would be brought to justice. The evidence against Sheikh Hasina is extremely overwhelming. There are at least 4 phone conversations which were intercepted, which have been produced as evidence at court, where she can be heard saying that she's given the orders to shoot down the students. She's given the orders to use lethal weapons against them. She's given the orders to bomb them from helicopters. And so the evidence is pretty irrefutable, even though Sheikh Hasina herself is right now denying everything.
And Zyma, in the middle of all that happening last year, was it difficult for you to believe what was happening in your own country?
I don't think that while covering the protests, I did not think that it was difficult for me to believe what was happening, because, see, the Sheikh Hasina government has been known for brutality. Before these protests, I was covering enforced disappearances. I was covering extrajudicial killings. And the Sheikh Hasina government, unfortunately, had made enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killings, torture, cracking down on dissenters. She had made that a sort of government tool to use against anyone opposing her rule. And so the protests last year, it fit right into her playbook. It was exactly something that she would have done.
So she's in India now. Is there any likelihood that India will agree to extradite her?
Not at all. There has absolutely been no signal from India that they will be returning Sheikh Hasina. India simply put out a statement saying that they've noted the verdict. They did not say if or whether they will return Sheikh Hasina. Sheikh Hasina was taken off to India the day the government fell, and India had given her refuge. And all these 1.5 years, India has not yet given any sort of signal that they're going to be returning her. And with Bangladesh handing Sheikh Hasina the death penalty, unfortunately, this may just be reduced to a symbolic victory, because I don't think Bangladesh will be able to find any diplomatic partners who are willing to help them bring Sheikh Hasina back to Bangladesh, extradite her, that is, when what she faces here is death, because most modern states, they don't support the death penalty.
And what is life like in Bangladesh now? So many students died in those protests. With what has happened politically since then, does it feel that those protesters did not die in vain?
That is a very loaded question, if whether or not the protests went in vain. I do think that the fact that the Sheikh Hasina government could be overthrown was definitely a win for the population. So whether or not the rest of what has happened since then can be considered a win, I'm not very sure about that. Yeah. However, we are heading towards elections in February, and this will be the first elections where many like myself will be voting, because I've never been able to vote. I'm 35. I've been a voter for many, many years, but I've never been able to vote because any seat where I'm from, I've either seen uncontested elections being held from my seat, or my vote was already cast by then. So a lot of people are excited to be able to vote for the very first time in their lives.